Welcome, everyone, and thank you for joining us today. I'm thrilled to host this session on GIS for transportation mapping with my peers Arthur Getman from Replica, Ted Brown from Maricopa Association of Governments, and Glen Franklin from Bentley Systems. If we haven't met before, I'm Abigail from Ecopia AI. Today we'll each be spending about 15 minutes explaining where our organizations fit in the transportation planning workflow, followed by a panel where we will address any questions or thoughts you might have as the greater transportation and/or government community. You can ask these questions in the Q&A section throughout the presentations or during the panel, just whenever they come to you. To start things off, we'll also get a poll going to better understand where you're coming from and who you are. So if you could please respond to this now, that would be awesome. While everyone is responding, I'll highlight why we wanted to put this panel together. As we all know, regional planning has become increasingly complex due to climate change, population shifts, and evolving transportation needs. Planners are challenged to adapt strategies that accurately reflect these changes, ensuring their analytics are grounded in reality. The advancements in geospatial technology have revolutionized how we collect, update, analyze, and share data, opening up new possibilities for transportation planners, engineers, consultants, and so forth. By leveraging these capabilities, we can create safer, more accessible, equitable, and sustainable communities. Today, we'll dive into a fascinating case study from Arizona's Sun Corridor megaregion, an innovative repository for transportation and socioeconomic data that helps communities of all sizes within the mega region's vast 31,000 square mile area make informed transportation decisions. Our panel will share their insights on determining the most relevant data sets for specific community needs, effective data collection methods, and emerging trends in regional planning across the country. By the end of this session, you'll have a deeper understanding, or at least we hope you will, of how GeoAI can transform your planning efforts and why staying ahead of these technological advancements is crucial for the future of our communities. So I think we've given enough time for the poll to be responded to. And it looks like we have a lot of local government here with a little bit of state, which is great because I think the case study we're speaking to and some of the use cases are really going to be geared to that. And really, we have a couple of friends out in Africa and Asia, but really a lot of Americans. And so again, I think a lot of these case studies are catered to that. So this is great, but not to say that I don't think you can still learn a lot and transfer that knowledge there. And we do have a mix of people in different sectors, from public safety, a lot in transportation and planning, but still people in sustainability and some others. So great attendees, thank you all for being here. And I think with that, we'll pass it over to Arthur Getman to start his presentation.
Thanks so much, Abigail, for the warm intro. And hi, everyone. Arthur Getman, Senior Solutions Engineer from Replica. And I, as I'm sharing my screen, I'll share that I actually come from local government. So I'm pleased to see that a lot of you share the same background. I'm based in New York City and worked at the New York City Department of Transportation prior to my time at Replica, and really focused on GIS and thinking about how do we get the most out of mapping and our GIS software. The thing that I'm here to talk to you about today is how can we use big data to understand really granular insights, mostly in transportation trends, but that really extends beyond into the world of economic development and into the world of just understanding the built environment and what's happening out there. So Replica is a brief intro of what we're trying to do. As big data sets have emerged into the marketplace and become available to us as planners, as engineers, as GIS specialists, we've really kind of, or at least I speak for myself, I've struggled with understanding how to join data sets together. And I'm curious if you all have had the same experience. But one of the data sets that I relied on most was census data, which I think is still a really vital data set. But then I started relying on sort of transportation data sets, or AADT and road volumes and things like that, which are obviously very important in transportation planning. Then I started also relying on newer data sets. One of the ones that we rely on at Replica is spending. So transaction data, anonymized transaction data, and understanding where spending is happening in our cities and in our states and across the world. And then parking data as well as active mode data, right? Understanding where people are biking and walking. So all these data sets are really beneficial, and there's a lot more data sets coming onto the marketplace and becoming available to planners and GIS specialists. But how do we make the most of them, and how do we tie them together? And this is really a question that we are seeking to answer at Replica. I'm just going to touch very briefly at a high level about how we're doing that. We are really combining as many data sets as possible and trying to make them speak to each other. So you can see on my screen here, on the bottom left-hand side of the screen, these 5 categories of data that we're ingesting. So it includes things like census data or the consumer and resident data. The consumer comes from consumer marketing data and survey data. And this allows us to say, let's be sure that we're accounting for everyone in the built environment. So what are the different types of people that are living and traveling about our world, really, and in our cities and states? Beyond that, location data. What are all of the data sets that we can get on how people are traveling and what are the trends? So this includes cell phone data or LBS data. It includes GPS or connected vehicle data. And it also at times includes other data sets like EV ownership data and things more specific and granular. The built environment data is sort of what's possible in the built environment. So think of things like GTFS feeds, land use data, where we have really granular understandings of what different destinations and land use and buildings are used for. Economic activity data is that transaction data that I mentioned, and this actually is becoming really important to tie these data sets together and actually show us, well, if I see someone headed to a specific destination or a number of people headed there, is that for shopping at that retail destination, or is that for working there, right? Or is that for a recreational activity nearby or something like that? It gives you a little bit more color. And then I think most importantly, ground truth data to actually make sure that you're always validating and seeing what you're doing if that's correct. And so what we do is on the right-hand side is our process. So we're creating a synthesis of the population. In other words, we never want to actually, when we're using these big data sets, some of them it's actually easy to back into some personally identifiable information. What our process is, and I think a lot of people are focused on this, is how do we make sure that we don't actually ingest any personally identifiable information? We don't have any privacy concerns. The way to do that for us is to actually create a synthetic population that is matching the real world down to the block group. So anything that you see in a census product in block groups, for instance, socioeconomic or demographic splits, will match in Replica data and on Replica's maps, but we're actually not saying anything about anyone in particular, nor are we ingesting anything like that. Then we're training behavior models based on granular data that we're seeing and site-specific movements that we're seeing. And these behavior models are actually meant to understand how do different people interact with the built environment. So how does someone in my age group, income bracket, location of residence, industry of work interact with the built environment where I'm living, right? And that gives us a lot more detail and granularity with how I might be traveling in the built environment. Once we have all of that, once we've synced the behavior models with the synthetic population, we run simulations to actually simulate the real world and how people are moving about the real world. And then, as I mentioned, the last step is to calibrate the outputs and make sure that we look at transit counts, ridership numbers, traffic counts, freight counts, bike and pet counts, and say, hey, let's validate what we're outputting and see how close we are to reality and where that works well and where it doesn't. And I think that's really important to do in all of our work, is to really understand and check yourself and see exactly what we're able to do and where we might need better resources. So how does this differ? I know that was quite a bit of information, but how does this differ from what we've done in the past? The idea here, again, is to just be able to connect all of this geospatial data and actually ask, when I have people headed on an interstate, driving on an interstate, I might have that volume number, but it's actually a little bit more important, or maybe just as important, to know where those people are headed and where they came from. So that if I have to do work on a, let's say, an exit ramp, I actually know who that's impacting and what portion of my volumes and what trips it's impacting. So are these folks headed to work? Are they commuting to work? Or are these discretionary shopping trips that they can do later in the day and perhaps isn't as vital to keep open for the entire day? So really tying in land use data, geographic data, demographic data, and anything that we're talking about, it often yields questions, right? What portion of your volume is headed for, for the downtown destination? What portion of them need to go park there? Those sorts of questions you can actually begin to answer once you connect these data sets. And so the way we do that geographically or geospatially is we have a main portal application where we have a map-based tool that allows you to ask really specific questions and dive into the details of something like network link volumes. And all of that geospatial data is, you can visualize it on the map, which is kind of one of the main uses of it. But I find that it's also important to actually have redundancy in how you view geospatial data. So you can also look at it in a tabular format. So the table below here is just an excerpt of trips and activities that you can see details for in a tabular format as well. And then on the left-hand side are some of the metrics that folks typically pull out of this data. Now, one of the diving into some of the use cases and some of the things that some of the interesting maps I think that customers have created and we've created. One of them is understanding how does different land use types generate different types of trips. And so this is an example out of New Jersey where actually you can filter the data to say, let's look at trips when they start at single-family residential origins, and let's look at trips when they start at multifamily residential origins. And you can see the yellow on these two maps. So single-family on the left, multifamily on the right. And the yellow is kind of the highest bucket there in our color ramp. And so what we're seeing is that from single-family residential trip starts, there's actually a lot more VMT that's created. So obviously for climate and GHG emissions applications, it's really important to actually look at the land use and to think about how housing and development actually factors into those emissions. And so this is an easy way to quantify that sort of thing. On the network link side, one of the things that I kind of mentioned, and I think an important application for the data is looking at specific trails and specific corridors. In this example from Denver, we're looking at the Cherry Creek Trail on the left-hand side. And when you select it, you can actually visualize all of the routes associated with the Cherry Creek Trail. And so here on the right-hand side, we're actually seeing on a typical day about 266 bicyclists and pedestrians access the Cherry Creek Trail using West 12th Ave. And so this is one of the most important, or an important connection to Cherry Creek Ave, and it might be ripe for sort of intervention and making sure that the facilities there are adequate because it's such an important on-ramp onto Cherry Creek. But you can also kind of look at what we estimate to be the population of people that use Cherry Creek Trail in terms of household income, in terms of what are the trip purposes, where are folks ending up, right? And so one of the interesting findings here is actually 30% of trips on this trail are headed for work. So people are using the trail to commute to work, which is an interesting finding there. Another application out of Texas is, again, actually pairing two operational analyses, or maybe an operations analysis with a planning analysis. TxDOT frequently uses OD data, as do many transportation agencies. In kind of thinking about the future and allocating resources appropriately based on OD flows and changes in ODs. Well, you can do that now while also looking at the corridors that are most responsible for those OD flows. So for instance, these are ODs into Houston, but you can actually segment it out and say, well, what portion of those trips into Houston happen on I-10, right? And where do they come from when they happen on I-10? Similarly, for a lot of federal grant applications, this is actually an example that shows bike and ped behaviors, and this is for a livable center study that RTC in Southern Nevada conducted. And this is a great example of actually showing another version of redundancy, and this is application redundancy. So I shared Replica's application, but I think one credo that we have that I think others also share is that there's plenty of great mapping tools out there, and we don't want to limit folks to just our own. And so we actually allow folks to export data out and work in Esri, work in QGIS, or work in other platforms. And this is an example of a map of a bike ped analysis that they created for Henderson, Nevada, using an Esri product and Replica data. And I think just one more use case I'd like to share here is one that a transit agency created. And these are really cool maps looking at stations, subway stations in New York City, and trying to identify and pinpoint where last mile interventions should happen. For instance, pedestrian facilities and bicycle parking. And so what the MTA in New York City did is they looked at the demand for those facilities on the left-hand side by looking at where there's existing bike ped micromobility activity around stations. And the darkest purples, or the purples here, show the highest activity. And then on the right-hand side, they looked at the equitability of stations and saw where are lower income, non-white, minority race ethnicities, blue-collar workers, what the stations that they are most reliant on. And they're using this in a report called Extending Transit's Reach to cite these last mile connections, not just where they're in demand, but also where folks that are most in demand for transit or most reliant on transit will have access to them as well. I'm just going to touch on this very briefly. I think this is actually the last slide. This is actually a analysis that's forward-looking. So I'm not going to spend too much time, but you can also, in our data now, ask, well, given what we know about the transportation network, what happens when the Sumner Tunnel in Massachusetts is closed for restoration, as it is this summer? Who is most impacted? What times of day? How are volumes affected? And how can we think about an equitable road closure plan for the Sumner Tunnel? So I thank you for the time, and I will stop sharing my screen now and hand it back over to Abigail.
Thanks, Arthur. My share screen. I really liked the comments about redundancy and just, there's so many different uses for data, and so it's great to be able to see and visualize in different formats. As I kind of said earlier today, I'm Abigail from Ecopia AI, and I support our transportation sector clients. And today I'll be speaking to how Ecopia's AI-powered high-precision mapping ensures safe, equitable, and sustainable communities. Before we dig into how our maps of infrastructure assets support decision-making, I'd like to highlight why what Ecopia does is so powerful for transportation agencies looking to make the most equitable and sustainable decisions for their communities. At all levels of government, transportation agencies are working towards making their network safer for all citizens, increasing the viability and accessibility of transportation alternatives, all while also reducing the impact of their carbon footprint. All of these strategies have the overarching goal of making our communities more vibrant and having thriving citizens. To achieve these objectives, we do need to first understand what our current transportation system looks like and how these assets interplay with each other. From there, we can then identify improvements and start to make strides towards our goals. As I outline here, how do we know which safety countermeasure to implement and where, and who is it helping if we don't have a detailed understanding of the existing infrastructure? Or how do we make sure that all our citizens can access community resources, even if they don't have their own vehicle, if we don't understand what their transportation alternatives look like and what those provide access to? How can we encourage zero emissions travels without knowing where those assets already exist and or need to be expanded? And most importantly, how do we make the most of budgets that unfortunately aren't infinite without weighing decisions across all of our network? The starting point from Ecopia's perspective is to have a very detailed and complete map of your infrastructure so you can complete assessments that are grounded in reality and of course are equitable to all. The main challenge would be that historically, wide-scale, repeatable access to routinely updated quality foundational map data hasn't ever been a true possibility. Of course, agencies have information on anything constructed in their regions. Sometimes that's in design documents stored in filing cabinets, or sometimes it's in a PDF on a computer, or maybe a CAD drawing of a single asset. But inventories in the industry tend to be in a tabular form or maybe a single linear model, which means, of course, there are records because transportation agencies know how important data and tracking is. But it may be hard to do some of this analysis. For example, here, if you're looking at this Excel, you can't really tell if the road design encourages or discourages safe driving practices, right? I don't think you can either tell also necessarily whether it'd be a good candidate for complete streets. So maps of assets and how they interplay with other components of the environment are critical for understanding assets, determining how to improve the design or function, and then tracking the impact of those changes as you implement them. And due to the current market conditions for geospatial data procurement, the possibility of routinely tracking assets accurately wasn't really feasible. Geospatial data users have to make the continuous trade-off between affordability, accuracy, currency, and the scalability of their data. Of course, you can access automated softwares and use them to process large areas of imagery very quickly at a very low price. But then when you look at your results, only 60 to 70% of features that are visible in the imagery are captured, and they're often distorted shapes that won't accurately reflect what that asset looks like or its size in reality. This accuracy gap means you now need to spend thousands of hours correcting this automated output, offsetting pretty much any time and cost savings you achieve through automating. Alternatively, of course, you can always go with the traditional map source, manual digitizers. And when you train these teams, you do get a really high quality data set, which means you can rely on that for important investment decisions and, of course, decisions that implicate people's lives and their safety. But it's either going to take a lot of time, making the data typically outdated before you get it, or you're going to spend a lot of money to get this data quickly, which means you can't do this kind of extraction frequently. This trade-off of time versus costs means it hasn't been really feasible to keep inventories of features up to date at the cadence of change that happens. We all know that what a city looks like today is going to change tomorrow as infrastructure projects start and end daily, let alone what it's going to look like in 3, 5, 10 years. This lack of access to current, accurate, and comprehensive data harms the power of effective policies and the ability to track the success of safety, equity, and sustainability strategies, since their traditional options have limited what can be achieved. And this is really why Ecopia's AI system is so powerful. We extract data at countrywide scales in record timelines while maintaining the accuracy when achieved through manual digitization, so that you can be confident relying on these layers for decision-making. In addition to being quick and affordable, the normalized data that Ecopia's AI system outputs allows for true updating instead of map recreation, which is really important, again, for tracking the impacts of your decisions and how you might want to change your strategies based on what you're seeing occur once you do that. But more simply put, to give you more context, what Ecopia really does is we leverage high-resolution aerial imagery from our partners like Hexagon and Nearmap in the US. And then we take that imagery and we convert it into an analytics-ready format, which is vector. And that can be used by planners, engineers, and consultants to optimize your decision-making. So for example, here, you can see all the individual road lanes being extracted, so center lines. And those are all positioned where they are in the real world. And you have turn lanes, so those middle left turn lanes, and bike lanes and shoulders. And all of these have their widths attributed to them, which means you can have a detailed understanding, again, of how these are interplaying in the real world. And lane information isn't all we extract. We're also picking up medians and whether they're raised, painted, or planted, crosswalks and their types, sidewalk center lines and polygons, as well as driveways, railways, parking, paved surfaces, kind of that foundational layer. And again, that maybe redundancy, but that ability to really work and to support several different use cases that many transportation and public sector agencies have. So as you can see here, this data is being used by DOTs, MPOs, councils of government, and cities across the US to ensure their planners, engineers, and consultants are weighing investment decisions based on how the system is currently operating and how to most efficiently make a positive impact on our communities with these infrastructure improvements. But I think it's obviously always more helpful to dig into a couple ways this data can actually support some of these key functions of a transportation agency, starting with safety countermeasure selection. Because when one has detailed information about their network, it becomes viable to move away from a more reactive crash-based analysis to proactive network-wide screens. So one major concern is the fatality rate of rural road crashes, despite the lower number of vehicle miles traveled on them. But studies have shown that infrastructure like shoulders can provide a buffer, reducing the impact of these crashes. The challenge is that rural road networks are vast and expansive, which means it can be challenging to maintain data on what they look like. So for example, due to the large number of rural roads and low mileage on them, it may be common practice to maybe map the shoulders every 10-ish years, or alternatively, make an assumption about shoulder presence based on the Green Book shoulder width suggestions based on a functional class. And as we can see here, even within those standards, the width can vary quite a bit, as a 2-foot versus 8-foot shoulder is going to offer quite a different level of protection. And then you can see in the screenshot, right, leveraging functional class methodology here, you would have shoulders present along many of the connecting routes. And then when you look at Ecopia's extraction of shoulders, which is the orange lines in this image, you can see that the road to the left that is connecting the city to the interstate actually has way less shoulder coverage than would have been predicted. And if one were to evaluate the road safety based on the assumptions, many of these roads' protection levels would be over-quantified, which in turn could result in more crashes, which obviously doesn't align well with what so many agencies are working so hard with their towards zero death goals. It also can result in walking and biking being encouraged on paths that indeed have no shoulder and would be very high risk. And so Ecopia's data that's created from current high-resolution imagery gives you the actual location and the width of the shoulder lanes across your entire network, so you can be confident in your understanding of risks and the best strategy for reducing those based on concrete evidence. Another common low-cost safety countermeasure used across networks is medians. Obviously, crash data and daily traffic volume go into making the decision of where to implement these safety improvements, but since they require space and a potential reduction in lanes, so does understanding, again, that actual infrastructure that is in place. So to do this, safety guides suggest understanding if a sidewalk's present, crosswalks are present, the intersection control type, and the width and types of lanes present in the area, and of course, if a median already exists or not, and then what type of median that is. And then when a safety engineer already has all this data mapped and it's across that network, they can then take that existing information on road volume, crashes, and land use, tie them to that physical infrastructure, and then determine the ideal candidates for median implementation, and realistically, any kind of countermeasure tied to this across the network in a methodical way, turning safety investment decisions into a process that's proactive and really evidence-driven. These layers also support improvements for vulnerable road user safety, which goes hand in hand with encouraging zero emissions transportation alternatives. And if we want to encourage behavioral changes, it's been well studied in the transportation community that it's usually best done through infrastructure changes. So from a safety perspective, when we look at USDOT's pedestrian safety improvement plan suggestions, over 50% of these include street design and engineering. And if we know this is the case, but we don't have an idea of what our system looks like, I think it can be challenging to determine where do we need to change street design? How do we prioritize the strategy? Again, given capital constraints. And then again, due to kind of historic constraints on acquiring infrastructure data, a lot of these decisions can be made based on comments. And while stakeholder engagement is very important for inclusive planning, especially for outlining considerations that aren't even visible in a map, starting with the region's current infrastructure is a much more equitable and efficient way of doing this than relying on comments. Because when we do this, what we're prioritizing a lot of the times is the loudest voice or people with the most free time, which can be usually wealthier citizens, which isn't necessarily solving for that broader equity and safety that everyone here is really striving and working hard towards. So again, while these concerns may be valid, it also isn't considering the system as a whole. So instead, we can leverage Ecopia's data to screen full systems and prioritize based on the research and data so that we're very targeted in our stakeholder engagement, ensuring that, everyone's still involved, but there's some decision or some data-driven decisioning behind this. And so as you can see here from our work with San Bernardino County, when you have maps of all the existing sidewalks and bike lanes, it becomes very easy to identify gaps in infrastructure. As you can see, that's the red and orange circles here. And then, of course, you can't remedy every single gap today. I know we all wish that would be what could happen. But unfortunately you can't. So once you have those gaps identified, you can start to consider the factors that are going to drive the importance of connecting the gaps and prioritize it, like access to a car and then proximity to critical resources. Or you can filter by the widths of sidewalks, which is what you're seeing here, to determine the varying levels of Americans with Disabilities Act compliance, potentially prioritizing all sidewalks under 3 feet that aren't PROAG compliant, since that's a new mandate. But in the end, you can display this, and these are your suggested improvements with the justifications, gather feedback from your citizens, and of course, have that decision based on evidence. And the same goes for selecting bike lanes and reducing the level and stress incurred by users. Requires understand many road infrastructure components, like the bike facility type, number of traffic lanes and widths, frequency of on-street parking, and so forth. But with Ecopia's data, it's really feasible to take this into account and ensure it's safe for cyclists to ride in our communities. This comfortability makes the zero emission mode likely to be used, and then our carbon reduction targets likely to be achieved. With Ecopia's bike lane layers, again, you're seeing here, you can get a really good baseline understanding of your assets, being able to efficiently determine connectivity and comfortability, like the 0.63 miles of sub 2 foot bike lanes that you saw in this region, and the 3.6 miles of protected lanes in the region as well, which are really great for users. And then just like I had said with sidewalks, once you know the gaps, and you can start to prioritize if or how you will invest in these assets. So looking at lane configuration, frequency of on-street parking along routes, and the number of right turn lanes coupled with traffic volume and speed, allowing really the planners and engineers to optimize where these locations are needed. And then of course, when you have detailed road width data, you can also take into account the road widths for corridor selection. Wider roads with lower traffic volumes are candidates for reconfiguration, which can be more cost efficient than right-of-way acquisition, which can allow you to stretch that transportation alternative budget a little bit further. And then finally, of course, you bring this all together and objectively and systematically prioritize the most comfortable and feasible network expansion options. So in just 5 weeks, Ecopia had created bike lanes, medians, and sidewalks across the entire SunCloud regions project to support their team's equity and sustainability goals. And helping hardworking public sector teams with their decision-making so they can support their communities is what we're most proud of. So it's exciting now to welcome Ted Brown on stage to explain the SunCloud project as a whole and in detail, and then hint on kind of how Ecopia's data supported their goals there.
All right. Good morning, everyone. My name is Ted Brown. I'm the Deputy Transportation Director for Data Management and Application at the Maricopa Association of Governments in Phoenix, Arizona. It's a pleasure to be here today to present on the Arizona SunCloud Data Portal. I'll take you through what it is, some of our more innovative data layers, and end with a very quick demonstration of the tool itself. So what is the Sun Cloud? The Sun Cloud is the title of an Accelerated Innovation Deployment Grant that was originally awarded in 2017. MAG, the Arizona Department of Transportation, and a slew of other partners were awarded $1 million to develop a data portal to increase and improve the accessibility, usability, and quality of data and analytical tools that we use for transportation planning. Now, the goal of the project was to better understand the needs of the corridor and help align our strategic investments. But one side benefit that we heard from our partners over and over during the project was what an enormous help this was, particularly for rural communities, as we were providing high-quality data sets across the entire study area. For our project, that Sun Corridor study area refers to 5 counties in southern Arizona. It's Maricopa, Pinal, Pima, Santa Cruz, and Cochise County. Those counties cover a bit more than 30,000 square miles of land and somewhere in the neighborhood of 85% of the state's population. We needed many hands to make light work. And so we formed a robust team of stakeholders. We included all the MPOs and COGs. We had county agencies and, of course, our partners at ADOT and FHWA. Over the next 5 years, MAG led the team that developed and implemented the Sun Cloud data portal. So I want to touch on some data layers. We have 22 distinct layers in the final platform. I obviously cannot cover all of them, but we do cover all the traditional transportation data sets, everything from traffic counts to model data to asset condition. However, being an Accelerated Innovation Deployment Grant, we obviously had to do some innovating. And so I just want to highlight a couple of layers here. And the first up is safety. Abigail touched on a lot of points that go into the safety. For us, we applied the Highway Safety Manual methodology to identify areas where opportunities exist to implement very impactful solutions. To do that, we had to combine a huge number of underlying data sets, including crash data from ADOT, our travel demand model AABTs, the best available safety performance functions, and as an additional input was that median information that we attained from Ecopia. The presence of and the width of the medians are an important input to that overall calculation. The ability for us to evaluate projects based on something other than crash rate was a big step forward, and the ability to evaluate projects based on a predictive methodology is a big jump forward for us. Another relevant layer is the bike lane and sidewalk layer. And on the screen, I'm showing the output of the bike lane analysis. We asked Ecopia to provide us the presence of bike lanes and the type of bike lane where it could be identified, and the width in meters for our entire arterial network. This data has been used in a couple of different ways, both inside and outside the project. Most notably, MAG has used it to ground truth our in-house bikeways map that developed kind of organically over the years as our member agencies reported to us when they put in improvements. We also utilize this in the development of a level of traffic stress metric for all of our bike facilities. Next up is our disadvantaged facility users layer. So before this tool and this layer, all of our equity scoring was based on proximity. So if you were near an equity priority community or community of concern, then you would get the points. That's kind of a less than ideal methodology, as it doesn't actually take into account who's actually using the roadway in question. So instead, we partnered with Replica and essentially had them run a select link analysis on every segment in the network. What that meant for us is that for each roughly 1 mile segment, we got a report about the number of users and of each user's home location. From there, we would combine that data with our disadvantaged community information, in this case, Justice 40. And with those 2 pieces of information, we're able to calculate the percentage of roadway users that have a home location in a disadvantaged community. That's a kind of a monumental step forward in terms of how we can score equity. And on the screen here is an example of how this change in methodology can help us do better evaluations in our region. So this little segment of roadway on South Extension Road doesn't tick any of the underlying disadvantaged community boxes. However, all of the blocks around it tick multiple. So in our old analysis, an improvement on this segment of roadway would have received a very low equity score. However, using our new analysis method, using the Replica data, we can show that we actually have well in excess of 70% of roadway users having a home location in a disadvantaged community. So what can you do with the Sun Cloud? Well, this platform was designed for maximum flexibility, but also ease of use. So we've tried to incorporate many common and useful tools. You can easily switch between symbolization. Within attributes, you can filter either by attribute, that's to say, I only want to see roadways with like 50 crashes or more, or by geography, meaning I just want to see roadways, within my municipality or my county or my MPO. You can also print those maps for inclusions in reports and emails. And finally, you can directly export the data for further analysis in the software of your choice. Our motto throughout this project was kind of that old Muhammad Ali quote about different strokes for different folks, and this is the culmination of that. And so out of the box, we have recommendations based on nationwide best practices and professional judgment. But we knew with the extreme number of agencies involved in this project, we were never going to land on a single set of weights that was going to make everybody happy in their analysis. So instead, we built a custom widget where you can set your own weights on the fly in your browser and then rescore the entire 5-county network in a couple of seconds. So if bridges are not important to you, you can set them to 0 and rerun. If you think reliability is more important, you can crank that puppy up and hit rescore. And away you'll go with your bespoke set of weights tailored to your needs. We're very proud of this feature and the flexibility that it provides to all of our end users. And with that, I just want to take you through a very quick demonstration. And so we have a very short video here. And in this first one, I'm going to change it from showing pavement condition over to safety. And then I'm going to change it from excess expected high severity crashes over to bicycle and pedestrian injuries. After that, I'm going to hit our filters tab. I'm going to select which kind of filter I want to use. In this case, I'm going to pick city. And then I'm going to select the lovely city of Chandler, Arizona. And when I do that, it's going to zoom directly into their city boundaries. It will get rid of all the extraneous layers, or excuse me, segments on the map. So we just see Chandler very clearly. From there, I can go to print that or export it for those emails or reports. To Arthur's earlier point, we also love the tabular data. So we have a table view here. From here, you can also export this to a CSV, JSON, whatever you like to use. You can also click on the individual segments on the map itself to get some additional information about safety on that particular segment. In addition to this ability to filter and sort and find information really quickly, we also can use this for a really practical use case. And so in this example, let's pretend that the federal government's about to issue a notice of funding opportunity, heavy quantitative criteria. This tool is a fantastic quick reference tool for those types of exercises. So let's pretend that NOFO came out and they're really interested in bike and pedestrian fatal and serious injuries. We'll go pavement roughness and we'll go reliability. And so we can set all those weights higher. It'll automatically reduce all of the other ones. We'll click rescore and our entire network is currently being rescored in just a couple of seconds. We'll get an updated map using just our custom weights. I'm now clicking on the hide and show button so you can see how that changes based on our base weights. From here, you can either export this entire map, so you can take it into GIS, do some further analysis. You can start diving in and clicking on those individual segments. This has already been used for a number of successful grant applications in our region. I wanted to provide a couple of useful links. So we have our main site, we have our training video, which was done with our agency partners. It's about 75 minutes long, but it tells you everything you could ever possibly want to know about all the buttons on that website. Finally, we also, since this was an FHWA project, we've hosted all of the code and the related files online at Bitbucket. So for the tech savvy among the crowd out there, you can go and fork this repository and start building your own enhancements or removing some of the things you don't like. And before I wrap up, I just wanted to address the question I get asked the most often after giving this presentation, and that's, is there a plan to keep our platform up to date? The short answer is not presently. As was alluded to earlier, data is not cheap. The longer answer is that most of the data on this platform is going to stay useful and relevant for multiple years. Some data sets like bridge condition, that's not going to dramatically change on an annual basis. However, some of the more useful layers, thinking about like that disadvantaged facility users layer, that is going to change, and that is something we're going to need to update on a more regular basis. So we're continuously looking for opportunities to fund the platform. We've identified a new grant opportunity from the federal government, and we've already submitted our application for that. But now is a great time to learn about the Sun Cloud. I think we have another 6 months or so before we're really going to dig in and start updating some of those layers. I just want to say thank you very much for your time and attention. That completes my presentation, and I would like to turn it over to Mr. Glen Franklin from Bentley.
Thank you, Ted. I appreciate that. Give me just one moment to get my screen up. For Well, thanks again. My name is Glen Franklin. I am a product manager in Bentley Systems. I work under the iTwin Capture umbrella. And within iTwin Capture, we're really heavily responsible at looking at applications that import and consume reality data, but they also subsequently and relatedly look at a lot of GIS data. So my goal and my responsibility is to make sure that we have the most efficient way to try to import all sorts of this data, try to use it together, have a centralized source of truth for this, and just make sure to continue the advancement for this. As we're aware, reality data and GIS data can be used in almost any sort of different kind of application, and that's how you cater it and how you use it is really what helps individuals even more so for their specific job tasks. I want to take a brief moment and kind of just go through the digital twin journey that Bentley is doing right now. And we have 4 main steps of how we take reality and GIS data. And it's a pretty linear sort of process. From one stage, you can start to get more information and continue on forward. But essentially, when you have your GIS or reality data, you really have to have it from a starting point where you have your remote sensing units that you have to capture and you have to manage. You have to import this sort of information. And from importing it, you're going to have a usable set of data that you could then utilize in the step 2, which is analysis. So we have manual methods, we have semi-automatic methods, we have purely automated methods, and then we also have AI methods to analyze the data that we're getting from our reality data. And then after that fact is the results of our analysis and our GIS and reality data can be federated and shared on an online cloud. And then lastly, where we get to is the stage where we're really trying to consume and integrate this across the board. So it might just be Bentley internal, but we might have ways and access to give this information, to share it to other stakeholders, to other vendors, and other people of the like. I just wanted to say, where is GIS on this? Because I've talked about reality data and GIS, but the reality is GIS is just so similar to reality data, and technically it's a component of reality data that we still have it as the input. If I have a remote sensing unit, and let's say I have a mobile mapping system, components of that mobile mapping system or that run might even start as your GIS. And then after I have that data, I'm doing my extraction analysis, which is generally exported out or used as some sort of vector data set. And consequently, it's then hosted, and then it's being consumed where we're still hosting it, we're editing it, we're utilizing it. So it just runs side by side with both our reality and our GIS data. I mainly want to talk about these 2 components here within this journey, but it's our analysis results to our GIS outputs. And then once we have these results, what are we going to do when we federate, we share, and we consume it in this way? So I'll give multiple different sort of examples of what can be done with Bentley applications, and then what you have with those outputs, what you can do afterwards. So I want to start here in this example, but this was a parking structure, and a user identified that there is high importance to try to figure out the exact amount of some telephone poles and really the heights and the attribution that came with this. And they really didn't have anything other than just a standalone point cloud data set. And when we start at this stage, sometimes we go from we just have reality data. So this is important to try to get this next step for either auditing and or analysis. This specific tool here was able to automatically extract the poles that was here. The results that we got out of this came as point cloud selections, which could then be converted into point clouds and or objects. And then when I talk about objects, then I'm talking about changing this from like purely reality data to then object data, vector data that can be subsequently attributed. So that would be one sort of scenario where we're trying to take that transfer of reality data to GIS data. And then secondly, what we end up getting with some individuals are just what we will say is point cloud data that may not necessarily have any classification that's there. So through our analysis and through AI training detectors, we're able to make custom detectors that can help classify data. And from this data, we could follow that same sort of workflow in that previous slide, in which we can start to select components from this classification, turn this information then into objects that will then allow for further attribution that we could still use inside of our applications, or we can prepare for different applications that are there. So in this specific example, it was an unclassified data set that through detectors that we were able to train and customize on our own, we start to create these classified data sets that then we can start to attribute in ways that are relevant for us. And what you end up getting is something more a combination like this, where this was both an unclassified data set that then required a lot of objects that came through this. So we had a workflow where a user was very eager to audit and identify components that were inside of a tunnel that was challenging to attribute well previously, and some of the information was a little bit outdated. So we ended up making a custom detector, and the detector was using parameters based upon those users to identify these relevant components that were inside of this tunnel. The thing I want to highlight for this is when we talk about efficiency and safety, it's very important. A tunnel is not always going to be the safest place to be. You could look at how actual narrow the curbs are on the sides. It's not something you always want an individual to go in to do. So throughout a custom detector and training, we're able to identify 5 or 6 main components that were inside of this tunnel. And then it was able to be selected, turned into an object, and then additional attribution was happening afterwards there too. What I do want to also bring up is we don't necessarily always need to have this kind of reality data. Sometimes we may only have image data, and from the image data, we can use image annotation editors and different AI tools that can turn annotations then into objects. That's something that we could talk about in a subsequent call in the future, but from this, I want to say that there's many different kinds of reality data that can be used to convert this information then into GIS data. The second example here is showing a little bit more of that step where we're able to take actual annotations. We turn the annotations into objects based upon some pre-configured detectors to identify manholes and grates. And then as they are turned into objects, they're then overlaid on the 3D space, which is what you can see in the top reference map of manholes and grates that were identified on an actual structure that is there. And this example as well shows some of the same sort of identification, but we have a combination of some of our internal tools that lets you do automatic extraction based upon point cloud geometry. So certain Z values and certain constraints and parameters that you can make. We were able to identify rail tracks in a very, very long distance. And then through different detectors, we were able to identify components of the tracks. I don't know the exact name of the components, but the important methods that are inside of the rail tracks that are necessary to be analyzed and extracted are something that can still be inputted there. So you do have more than one way to look at this information, but the important part about this is you're taking this that's coming from reality data, which can be what feels almost endless, and you're starting to turn it into something that's more identifiable and usable, and it's really giving you the foundation of, all right, I have a lot of important GIS data that I can get from this, and then what are your next steps? Do you want to add more to this GIS data? Do you want to export this out? Which leads me to where we are moving towards and where we're going. So we're getting to a point where our AI detectors and our training are becoming more and more understanding about the relevant information or the important information that's coming from reality data. So this is a new kind of teaser of what we're looking at as well. But this was an AI detector that's giving us curves and the edges of paint marking lines with a single click of a button, but then starting to give you the output and a classified result of important information that you may not actually have. So the exciting part about this is one, it's ever evolving. The challenging part about this is it is ever evolving, but it's becoming better and better very, very quickly. And it's very exciting to know that you can take a lot of information and you can really start to filter and get much more relevant information that's coming from your reality data. So that was the first component, really just talking about how you can analyze, extract, and get certain outputs. But we're still talking about what you really want to do, how you want to host this, how you want to share this, how you want to integrate this. And this is where I think this is still just as relevant. And it does seem to rhyme with all of our other great presenters on, we do want to have the option to make sure that you can do a whole bunch of stuff with this application internally, but you want to provide the option that you can use this in other host applications as well. So for example, with this was some aerial data in which we had mesh, point cloud, and a lot of photos. This was all imported into our application, which was then extracted using some crack detections via AI. Afterwards, we're able to take that information and we're able to host it as a feature class And from that feature class, we're able to still continuously use this data, but then we could also open up third-party applications via Esri right here as a plugin, and we can see all this information live, and we can still continue to have an adjacent workflow or maybe a well-developed workflow from somebody prior to continuously do their work. This is another example as well. So this is QGIS. It's showing something a little bit different, but we ended up taking the output of some of this work and just exporting it out into like a standard shapefile, but that shapefile can then still be viewed and overlaid back into the viewer data. And you can see a combination of road markings, geometry, and then some analysis on signs. So it's different sorts of analysis that's still exported out. It's used into GIS layers like this, and it's really helping expedite, and it's helping to make this a little bit safer to do in a large sort of scale. And then one last example I want to show here too as well is this information doesn't always need to just be staying in one view or the other. So the host views do have the ability to overlay and see this into our other viewer, so the viewer that would be on the right-hand side. But you can expect, and you can edit, and you can update this geometry. And based on certain workflows, you can also identify and extract different attributes that come back and forth. So the emphasis of this is if you already have something that's very well developed and made, and then you have reality data that you know can help, it can help update your already made GIS layers. You can add these two together. And once they're together, you could start to make minor changes based upon more updated reality data, in which you can reflect with your GIS data. Or inversely, you can do the inverse if you have more up-to-date GIS data and older reality data, and you need to see what the differences were based upon a different sort of result that is there. So it really is only scraping the ice of what's possible that's there. But as you could tell, we have the ability to look at the reality data. We have the ability to export this out in GIS formats. And then really, while we can still host it on our own and we could keep it here, we do offer the options to give this to other applications for other people and for other users, so that they could use this data and they could continue their extraction, or then they can do some of the more complex GIS analysis that they want to do as well. So I do want to thank you for letting me speak, and I would like to get everybody else, all the other panelists, back on as we start our Q&A session.
Great. Well, those were really informative presentations. At least I felt so. I hope it looks like from some of these questions, it was really helpful. So thank you. Thank you all. I'm going to start with the questions in the Q&A section. And yes, please, everyone, if you didn't get your question in during the time, or, if one of the answers spurs more questions, please feel free to continue to place your questions in there, but we'll start. This was for Arthur from Kurt. He was wondering if you have any Department of Transportation clients.
Yeah, I think DOTs are one of our biggest sets of clients, both on the local level and the regional level. MPOs in particular are very used to our data and use our data actually in conjunction with their own models. A number of state DOTs that we have as customers as well. I shared a couple of examples: Texas, Massachusetts. We've engaged with most DOTs in the country, if not all. But Texas, Massachusetts, California, Illinois, those are all longtime customers. And then we have some newer ones like Georgia and others that I'm sure I'm missing.
Awesome. And I'm sure it's nice to, if people start using data at the MPO level or the state level, it's nice to be operating also probably off of some of those same assumptions.
Yeah, definitely. It's great when multiple agencies use similar data sets. It's just easier to communicate, right? If you're looking at the same data that I'm looking at. And so that's what we're aiming to do.
And maybe Ted, just to kind of continue on this discussion, since you built such a huge data portal, I'm assuming Arizona DOT is also really happy to have that all aggregated in one spot and be able to access that information, again, operating off the same assumptions.
Very much so.
Awesome. Okay, and then another question for you, Arthur, is how this maybe differentiates from Placer AI.
Yeah, I'm not an expert at Placer AI. It's somewhat similar. I mean, we're running, don't quote me on this, but I believe Placer AI is estimating using cell phone data to estimate how many people are at different locations at different times of day. So if a park, for instance, is busy during a specific time of day, I believe that's the main the way that they process data. We do some of that as well. We're ingesting a couple of other data sets. So it's not just the cell phone data, but that's also an application for us as kind of hyper local visitation, is also one of the use cases that particularly local agencies, I would say, are most interested in.
Fantastic. And then this might be more of a question for both Ted and Arthur, and obviously Glenn, you're welcome to jump into whatever you'd want to, but kind of about the proxies for the generation of trips. And so someone was saying that that's usually socioeconomic attributes that are happening, and the travel distance and poor road conditions of the roads are trip reducing. So how do you correlate such different measurements, unit parameters, and transportation modeling? And do modes of transportation have an impact on traffic congestion? Let's start there and then maybe go into how that might change the decision around owning a car. Does anyone? Ted?
I'm happy to start.
Go. Okay.
And then I'm sure others have, there's a lot of questions in there, I think, so, and a lot of good ones. So I totally agree. For us, the way we incorporate both socioeconomic attributes and things like road conditions, and of course, with data like Ecopia's, I actually think that we can get even further. There's kind of always interesting ways to augment the relationship. But we have a multimodal router. And so it's essentially, it works the way that Google Maps works. So if I'm at work and I look at my restaurant that I want to head to after work, and it tells me, well, you can spend 20 minutes driving there, or 25 minutes biking there, or 30 minutes taking a bus there. Those are all options that I have. Our data adds a little bit more on top of that and says, and it incorporates, just like Google Maps does, the congestion at the time of day when that trip is happening, and the road conditions, right, that are influencers of that congestion. But it also says, based on the socioeconomic attributes of the person making that trip, what is likely to happen. So is someone representative of Arthur, not an actual Arthur, but is someone representative known to bike or willing to bike based on where they live and what their income is and all those sorts of attributes? And maybe that would influence their choice. Does transit line up with this trip time? Do the transit schedules line up? And is this person known to take transit, or might they? So that kind of impacts the probability for any one of those options.
Awesome. Ted, did that answer the question, you think, or you have something else to add?
Arthur gave a fantastic answer, and I am also not an expert in travel demand modeling, so I don't want to put my foot in it.
I like it. Leave it to the experts. Awesome. And then Glenn, you haven't really answered too many questions. So I guess one I had for you was, what kind of GIS data are you using, and where does that data need to be hosted?
Sure. So there's all sorts of GIS data that we're really using. When we can start in the beginning, during an initial import, it can just be basic vector data that we're getting from open source platforms that we then convert into other outputs as well. So I would say the most fundamental level is we're getting some open source shape files, or we're getting different web map services or web feature services, in which that's what we still use a lot. Inversely, we can take the information that we're getting from reality data when we don't necessarily have extracted or derived GIS data, and we can make the same sort of thing. So we can go from having it and using it, or not having it and creating it based upon our extraction analysis that's there. Being in Bentley and promoting Bentley, generally, yes, we like to have the stuff all hosted in our actual specific Bentley cloud, but we do have on-premise options, and we do have the ability to just give this information to somebody else if they want to store this, their Amazon Cloud bucket or something else in which we could connect to as well. So generally, yeah, we're trying to host our reality data and our GIS data up into our Connect portal in iTwin Capture and Reality Management, but we do definitely give that option. If if it makes more sense for the specific individual to have the data hosted elsewhere, however they really want to host it is really kind of up to what they want to do, but we can provide that option for them too.
Awesome. And Ted, did you guys run into any hosting problems with this? Not problems, but just maybe things you didn't envision based on how much data you have in there, or was that all pretty easy to determine based on kind of best practices, just for other local agencies here? All good.
We use best practices, and then we found a state conglomeration to host it. And so through the Arizona State Land Department, they are taking on the hosting duties for us since they see the value to the state.
Fantastic. Yeah. So for those local agencies, if data hosting becomes a concern, Bentley can help you. Same can your state. There's a little bit of options there. I see Clarissa Brown was asking about the value to rural communities. Specifically, there was something she was trying to do, but it was kind of viewed as maybe not being beneficial for their community. I think maybe I can speak on behalf of everyone here that we still would probably see value to collecting this information, since you still have to get place to place and access your resources. But I think you could reach out directly to any one of the members here today, and we can maybe help depending on what you were trying to do. I don't know Cydian that well, but depending on what you're trying to do, I'm sure everyone here would be happy to let you know if they think they could support your work, or maybe we're not the best solution. I don't know if anyone else has anything else to add.
Yeah, maybe I'll just add, Abigail, I totally agree with you. I think actually the rural context is where technology like AI and traffic modeling makes a lot of sense, because we oftentimes have less information. So our approach is to actually go into it knowing that we're not going to have, in rural communities in particular, we're not going to have a great representation in terms of cell phone pings or GPS data, because there's just fewer opportunities to collect that there. So we start with the population and say, well, let's account for everyone that we know that's living there, and understand that they need to get around despite what data is available for us to measure those movements, right? And so then we go out and actually model those movements and say, well, here's what we think is happening. And actually ground truths are perhaps even more important in that rural context. So yeah, I would just say that I think that's a great opportunity to bring in data.
If I could jump in on that one too, we covered in our project a huge swath of area and every type of community you could imagine. And for us, it meant when we have those smaller communities, particularly ones that are detached from kind of the metropolitan area, we needed to provide additional resources for QA, QCing that data, because they have less confidence, because they have lower number of pings. So for us, it was a resource allocation issue to make sure that that data was up to the quality that we want to use in our project.
I think I'll also add in as well too. So prior to my tenure at Bentley, I was somebody that operated reality data and mobile mapping systems for a very long period of time. And a huge chunk of my actual collections came from rural jobs. So there definitely was a need, while there is just really I would say the absence of having that highest quality or higher quality of data in more dense populations. And we did have to do the same sort of thing. We collected it. We found the most efficient ways to collect this sort of data. And then we were able to extract maybe the skeletal frame of important GIS data that came there. And then we did make sure to get with the people in those towns to make sure that there's the appropriate sort of way to extract this and what was relevant. So as for contracts and all that, I couldn't tell you, but I could tell as a need for the small communities, there was definitely value that we saw that came from this for these local organizations.
Awesome. And then Glen, maybe you can be or you could start by answering Kenneth's question. He's building a new sustainability tailored GIS program, and he was wondering about data repositories and if those could be provided to him. So
all sorts of data repositories. I would say that again, I would probably go to the Bentley sort of ecosystem where we host our data, and really on the back end we have Azure repositories, databases that we use. But with our on-premise sort of solutions, we would still offer, and I would still suggest something like your Amazon Blob storage that we could connect to as well. Those are the two main ones that have been there. And There are some individuals that just say, I don't really even want a repository quite like this. I just truly want to have my backend infrastructure of 50 terabytes or something like that too. So I can't really tell you which one is the best for you. I would have to look into the case-by-case basis if you're willing to invest the amount, maybe to own your information or host your own information based on legal reasons, or you want to say, I don't really want to deal with this. I would like it to be a little bit easier for somebody else to host this information for you in that way. But there are multiple different ways. So I think it would probably be most on like a case by case basis of how you want to really figure that out.
Thank you. Right. Lincoln is asking about everyone's respective data sets to incorporate transportation data related to accessibility, like physical barriers to public space or pedestrian infrastructure. I might just start, since I kind of hit on this a little bit in my presentation, that Ecopia's data is helping to support some forms of that. When you have the sidewalk widths, that's really helpful to know what kind of accessibility devices can actually use those pedestrian assets. And then we also are mapping truncated domes, which are kind of like a good way to do a baseline understanding of how much ADA compliance has happened in the area. So when you have those truncated domes, it doesn't mean it's perfect or totally up to standard, but that means there has been some form of work done in that area. And then what you can do, because you know that, is prioritize your on-site, like surveying to areas that you know hasn't been done as well. But maybe we'll start Arthur, then Glenn, then Ted.
Yeah. So for our data set, baseline, we have some data related to accessibility. So that includes things like pedestrian infrastructure and bike infrastructure, street topologies as well. However, I think that there's what we do often is augment our data with kind of more granular data sets that Abigail was talking about as well. So when there's particular turn bays or curb cuts that are kind of more on the CAD level, that's something that's a little bit more of an augment to our data, and our data is a little bit more, while at the network link, it's a little bit more zoomed out to that. Glenn, I'll pass it off to you.
Sure. I was going to say, honestly, it's very similar to how we operate as well too. We might have some baseline infrastructure that we have either had from a vendor or a user or collected somewhere prior. But with Bentley also being housed mainly with MicroStation and it being a really an engineering-based platform, we do have a lot of like open road designs and other information too that we generally use at I would say a high precision, high fidelity sort of usage combined with our reality data. But you can have large projects. What I've seen personally a lot of the time is a very, very detailed smaller project that you need to be seeing all the sort of attributes and components between, the slants of the roads, the curbs, the infrastructure, very specific details like that. And generally we're getting that from somebody who has done, I would say, a not small amount of effort prior. And then while we augment that and we look at that, we're really trying to, compare what we're seeing with the new data that we're deriving from our reality collections or auxiliary GIS data.
To Abigail's point about sidewalks, we're not only using it for the WISP, but also for gaps analysis. I think that's the only intersection of accessibility in the Sun Cloud currently.
Awesome. And I'll do a shameless plug, but next, I can't remember actually, if you go on to the Connect Me events, we're doing one about ADA compliance with the engineering firm Fair and Pierce. So for anyone else who's specifically interested in that, I would definitely sign up. And Spike had a question directly for Ecopia about our aerial imagery. We don't fly those ourselves, but we do have a large partner network that is updating most of the metros at least once a year, and then the states every 2 to 3 years. So we can definitely help you. We know all the big imagery providers, so if you need help with that, we're happy to support you, or at least point you in the direction of a couple of people who could help you with that. For Arthur, another question: are there traffic data available for different cities, roads, corridors? And I don't know if you guys share links to that. Maybe it's best they speak to you, but yeah, how would you like to address Druba?
Yeah, so the data is available. It's limited to the United States. So that's our one limitation today. We're kind of thinking about expanding and evaluating opportunities to expand into. Currently, we're thinking about Canada and Europe, but it's presently limited to the United States, but everywhere in the United States, including rural locations. And that includes cities, all roads, including trails, as I highlighted in the presentation, and corridors. So you can actually link roads and say, well, here's how I define Broadway, let's say, and look at that data for just that stretch of corridor. So hopefully that answers your question. But if not, you can email me, arthur@replicahq.com. Happy to, if that doesn't, happy to get more specific.
You. Okay, and Perry wants to know about reading street signs and the size of street signs. Maybe just because we have so much local government here, Ted, have you looked into that at all? So you kind of have found something that works really well that you maybe want to share on?
Sure, we piloted a project with a company called Cyclomedia, which was using dash-mounted cell phone footage to do a variety of things, and one of those was street signs. I think, at the end of the day, the determination was for a city of our size, it was going to be prohibitively expensive for the MPO to solely fund, but technology is moving fast, and who knows if that's still the case today.
Totally. And Glenn, I saw some LiDAR slides, obviously, through your presentation. So do you want to speak to what your team's found to be a good way to do this?
Sure. I know of two distinct ways that we can do it right now. Our existing desktop software has had a methodology for quite some time that can read signs. It is powerful, but it's maybe not quite as sophisticated as all of our AI detection. But you can determine this by making and deriving preset shapes and signs. And through the analysis, it looks at the reflectivity, which can correspond to really what's being read, and it can help you identify what kind of sign is there. So that does definitely work. But secondly, a lot of the newer AI detection that's coming has been trained on a lot of preset sort of signs. So similar, Cyclomedia, I've heard of a few other agencies that are doing the same thing where with enough training curriculum and understanding this well enough, you're starting to get the output of what it reads, and it's based upon shape, size. Quality, I don't know of completely, but it's been able to read what sign it is in higher detail. I think quality is a little more of a challenging one that we're still trying to figure out.
And I think maybe this, Clarissa, I'll go back to your question right after, but this kind of falls into what Savin was asking just about, there's a lot of AI technologies on the market. I think all of us kind of spoke to that today. But again, Ted, sorry to pick on you, but you are the public sector representation here, and we're speaking to a lot of public sector organizations who want to make sure they make a good decision. So do you want to maybe start with kind of speaking about how you kind of go about assessing that AI and what maybe strategies you've put in place to make sure that you're getting what you need in the end?
Sure. So MAG has taken a proactive approach to this kinds of technologies. We established an emerging technologies program. We have partnered with our 3 major universities in the state. So we fund small pilot projects, testing essentially different technologies so we can provide relevant information to our member agencies about maybe the direction might be worthwhile. We have an upcoming sales tax initiative in our region, and should that be successful at the ballot, they have set aside a significant amount of money to continue that program because our member agency sees the value of having a kind of almost research arm to help them establish which technologies might be most beneficial for our region in particular.
That's awesome. So then also, if you don't have the sales tax, you should reach out to Ted because he'll have known. I'm just kidding. Glenn or Arthur, do you have any suggestions you've seen having to work through showing people why your AI does work and can meet their needs?
I could go first if that's okay, Arthur.
Yeah.
I would say that the really impressive part of what I'm seeing right now is Bentley is definitely very open to all sorts of different AI. We have many different kinds of AI detection, and we really have just started operating newly on training. So while we might not necessarily have what you want, we can definitely have a discussion and be willing to figure out exactly what this expectation is. So I do know that there's other companies, there's many companies, AI is so powerful and there's so many people that are using it right now that might be perfectly suited for something too, but you might have something that may not even exist yet. So I think there's an interesting opportunity that way. But gosh, I think it really would just come down to really a discovery with the company and see if it best suits your needs, because there are many kinds of AI that I think is very redundant in certain ways. So it might be a bigger discussion of what current applications am I using and what would I like to stay in at the most, or do I have an isolated, very powerful AI application that I use specifically for this task too. So I think there's just kind of more that you need to dig into. And I'd say everybody on the call would probably say, I think I can help you very well with this, you know, and we'd probably all be open to talking to you and figuring out what the best solution would be.
Not much to add there. I think those are great responses. I mean, I would just say, kind of to echo more of what Glenn was saying, I think it definitely validations that AI companies do themselves are really useful, and I would ask to see them, obviously. But I would also kind of have a discussion about how that fits into the context of what your jurisdiction is. And perhaps I say that because I've come from New York City, where a lot of detection is a little bit more difficult just because of the density. So it just really depends on kind of what the specific challenges that you have in your area. And that's kind of what you should think about evaluating when you're thinking about detection providers.
Definitely. And I think in addition to the kind of consultative approach Glenn and Arthur are speaking to, specifically related to imagery-based feature extraction, I would always, there's a lot of false positive, false negative metrics that sometimes can be used. I would always compare those also to kind of what I was speaking to, what you're actually seeing be extracted and how accurately that reflects the geometry in the real world. I think that's always, because sometimes that could be misleading. So it helps you really see like what you're going to get from that side when accuracy is important. And then when it comes, just a large challenge of imagery extraction would be occlusions. So New York City, very tall buildings, lots of shadows. Again, for feature extraction specifically, I would try to look in those areas, see how trees are handled, can sidewalks continue through that, and so forth. So that would just be specific, again, if you're looking at feature extraction. And then Ted, Clarissa was wondering, do you use CIP funds to map out your rural areas, or was this all under the federal aid grant? How did that work?
The entire project was funded under that Accelerated Innovation Deployment Demonstration Grant. So no CIP funds, but who knows moving forward.
Awesome. Well, I think we're almost on time, and I don't see any other questions really coming through. So I'd like to thank everyone for their time, for all these thoughtful questions here. And we will be sending out the recording of the webinar. I know that was asked a couple of times in case anyone's wondering, but if you want direct slides, I'd reach out to the individual people here. But again, thank you, presenters. Thank you, attendees, for coming. It was a great conversation, and we hope you enjoy the rest of your day.
Thank you.
Thank you, everyone.